What happens oftentimes is that when we want to have a natural birth, we get tricked out of it. And it's not our fault, because the information that we have on natural birth that comes through the mainstream is that birth is painful, and that if you're doing it naturally, that you're basically trying to get a medal. A lot of times what we're taught about how natural birth unfolds, how our labor patterns are, it's not even physiological. And if you want to know more about physiological birth, this book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, is an excellent source of information. It tells you a deep dive into every single stage of labor and preparing for labor, and what happens to your brain and what happens physiologically to you for your baby. It goes into everything. So if you haven't heard my story before, what happened basically is that I wanted to have a home birth, and then I was tricked out of it. I was told that my baby wasn't growing properly. I wasn't given adequate information to make an informed decision on informed consent when it came to ultrasounds, when it came to non-stress tests, when it came to the diagnosis that they gave me of IUGR, or intrauterine growth restriction. They didn't tell me any of that. All they really said was, you can't have a home birth because he won't tolerate labor well. And the implication of that was that if I kept pushing and pushing and pushing to try to have my home birth, or questioning their judgment, that I was somehow putting my experience ahead of the health of my baby. And even my family themselves said, it's probably best if you just have him in the hospital. You want to be safe. So I was told, you want to be safe. And I trusted at the time that they would allow me to have a physiological, natural birth the way that I wanted. And what I found out is that the medical system isn't set up for physiological birth. They don't trust it. They don't understand it. They also don't know a hell of a lot about it. And so when things come up in your labor that deviates from the textbook, that's when they start trying to intervene. And something as simple as walking into the room can also derail your birth. But I'm not going to share about that particular story because that was in the hospital. But what happened afterwards with my home birth with Michaela, because as you know, I was like, this is it. I am determined. I am not going to let them tell me that I can't have a home birth next time. I'm having a home birth. And so for most of my pregnancy, I was in a very fight or flight combatant mode of, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do this thing and you can't stop me. But on the other side of that, I had that fear of, well, what if the same thing happens again? What if something else goes wrong? And I kept focusing on, what if my labor stalls? What if I get talked into transferring? What if my midwife isn't comfortable? What if I get pushed into vaginal exams I don't want in labor? And you know what? What happened is I ended up actually bringing that into my birth. So when I went into labor, my labor did stall. I did get talked into having vaginal exams I didn't want. And I did almost get talked into having a home birth transfer. And what I had to do is I had to face my fears, and I had to basically rework my brain. Because one thing that isn't taught in a lot of birth classes is that you really need to change your mindset. So I have 5 pillars of empowerment. If you've been following me for a while, you already know them. And for those of you who don't, my 5 pillars are as follows. You need to have the right mindset. You need to have the right education. You need to have the right environment. You need to have the right facilitators, and you need to have the right support. And 3 of those things are really crucial, especially once it comes time for you to give birth, because they affect the education that you get and they affect your mindset. And when you are in labor, you also need to be able to focus on positive thoughts. If your thoughts are on fear, if you're thinking and fearing what's going to happen, and you're worrying about your baby and you're worrying that you can't do it, your body is going to respond, and it's going to not be a good experience for you, because you're going to mess with the endorphins, you're going to be messing with oxytocin, you're going to be messing with adrenaline and cortisol and all of those hormones. And then birth is not going to unfold very easily. So in reading in Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage over the last several months, and working with my students, I've also come to the insights of why my own labors unfolded the way they did. So with my son, I had a little bit of false labor the week before because I had this fear that I didn't want to go to the hospital. And so ultimately, I didn't go into labor. It didn't progress. And then the next time I went into labor, and labor took a little bit longer because I noticed that my midwife was not on call. But then when I got to the hospital and I stayed, I then had the fear that they were going to pester me, that they were going to harass me. And what happened is I continued to get harassed. I got pulled from the tub. I got put on my back because I said, I don't want to be on my back. Basically, I focused on everything that I didn't want instead of what I wanted. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it goes back to the law of attraction. What we focus on gets stronger. So if you're focusing your mindset on what you don't want to happen, it's more likely that scenarios are going to come up. Either your labor is going to stall, or there's going to be a pushy nurse, and you're going to have somebody say something to you that's going to freak you out. And then things just start to happen and unravel. And there's a danger zone with this. So if you're needing to do more mindset work to work through your fears, and you're like, well, how exactly do I do that? Well, I have a system on how to do that, and I would be happy to walk you through it, and I would be happy to share those tips with you. I'll see you soon.